So when you hear the word cannabis, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You're probably thinking about the last 100 years or so of debate, right? But what if I told you that's just a tiny, tiny blip in a much, much bigger story? Yeah, we're about to uncover a history that has been almost completely wiped from our memory. Let's dive in.
For most of the last century, this is the picture that's been painted for us. Cannabis as public enemy number one. You know, the whole reefer madness era? This is the story we all think we know.
But here's the twist, and honestly, it's a huge one. That short period of prohibition, it is completely dwarfed by 5,000 years of a totally different story. For millennia, across pretty much every major culture you can think of, cannabis wasn't a menace at all. It was essential medicine, a sacred sacrament, and a core industrial material.
And that, right there, is the big question we're tackling today. How did a plant with such a profound and, frankly, positive history get so completely turned on its head? To figure that out, we've got to go way, way back to the beginning.
So, our story starts in ancient China. Here, cannabis, or ma as they called it, was one of the very first plants humans ever decided to cultivate. And this wasn't just some random weed they found, it was literally woven into the fabric of their civilization.
And this is where we meet a truly legendary figure, Emperor Shen Nung. We're talking way back, around 2800 BCE. This guy, who was seen as almost a deity, supposedly tested hundreds of herbs on himself, basically becoming the world's first pharmacologist. And one of his discoveries was about to change medicine forever.
In what many consider the world's very first medical textbook, Shen Nung wrote down all the healing properties of cannabis. Just think about that for a second. Thousands of years ago, he was recommending it for everything from gout and rheumatism to, get this, absent-mindedness. This wasn't some kind of alternative medicine. This was the birth of medicine, period.
You know, what's so fascinating is how they systematically figured out this plant's potential. As you can see, they started with the basics, using its fiber for stuff like cloth and rope. Then, thanks to guys like Shen Nung, they mastered its use as a medicine. And it all leads up to this physician named Hua Tuo, who around 200 AD creates ma-face san, an anesthetic made from cannabis. They were performing actual surgeries with this nearly 1,600 years before modern anesthesia was discovered in the West. That's just incredible.
Okay, so the plant's influence wasn't just physical, it was also deeply spiritual. As cannabis started to spread out from China, it became a cornerstone for some of the world's most ancient and powerful religions.
I mean, just look at the role it played across the East. In India, it's one of the 5 sacred plants mentioned in the Holy Vedas, a favorite of the god Shiva. In ancient Persia, Zoroastrians called it their #1 sacrament. Even in some Buddhist traditions, it's tied to Siddhartha Gautama's own path to enlightenment. What's the common thread here? This plant was revered, not feared.
Now hold on, because this is where the story gets really wild. Some scholars and researchers are convinced that cannabis played a central role in early Judeo-Christian traditions too, but that its name was literally lost in translation.
The whole thing hinges on this ancient Hebrew term, cannabis. For centuries, Bible translators just figured it meant calamus, which is a type of fragrant reed. But an anthropologist, Dr. Sula Bennett, came along and argued that this was a huge mistake, that both phonetically and historically, cannabis is almost definitely cannabis.
So if that's true, just think about the implications. This recipe from the book of Exodus is God's direct instruction to Moses for making holy anointing oil, and it calls for a massive amount of kanafbasm. This oil was used to consecrate priests and kings, literally anointing them as holy. In fact, the word Messiah and the word Christ literally means the anointed one.
All right, let's hit the fast-forward button and jump ahead a few thousand years. We're leaving the ancient world behind to see how this very same plant, now usually called hemp, became a pillar of the modern Western world, especially in the founding of America.
And we're not talking about some niche crop here. This was a strategic national asset. When Thomas Jefferson says hemp is of first necessity for the protection of the country, he isn't exaggerating. He means the ropes and the sails for the entire U.S. Navy. He means canvas, clothing, the whole shebang. It was so critical that in early America, you could actually be forced by law to grow it on your farm.
And if you need any more proof of just how important it was, here you go. In the early 1900s, the back of the US $10 bill literally had a picture of farmers harvesting hemp. In the bill itself, it was printed on paper made from hemp.
And its use wasn't just industrial, it was totally mainstream, even among the most powerful people in the world. I mean, look at this list. You've got George Washington, who grew it on his farm and used it for his awful tooth pain.
His buddy James Madison said it gave him insights while he was creating a new democracy. Across the ocean, Queen Victoria's own doctor prescribed it for, and yep, that's right, even William Shakespeare. Traces of cannabis were found in pipes at his home.
So, we've just seen 5,000 years of cannabis as a respected, useful, and even sacred plant. Now we get to the dramatic, sudden, and incredibly aggressive turn, the moment this medicine and industrial powerhouse became a public menace.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, their first weapon was language. See, for centuries, Americans knew the word cannabis. It was in their medicine cabinets. So opponents like the newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst deliberately started using this foreign-sounding word marijuana. It was a calculated tactic to link the plant to Mexican immigrants and stir up fear and racism that just didn't exist with the familiar word cannabis.
And just look at how fast this all went down. In the 1930s, Hearst, who, by the way, had huge investments in the timber industry for paper, unleashes this relentless propaganda campaign in his newspapers. That gets cranked up to 11 by propaganda films like Reefer Madness. By 1937, this guy, Harry Anslinger, backed by other powerful industrialists threatened by hemp, strong-arms the Marijuana Tax Act through Congress. In less than a single decade, 5,000 years of history was erased, and the plant was outlawed.
And that brings us to today. We are literally living through the process of unraveling that 20th century narrative and rediscovering the history that was so deliberately buried.
And you know, modern science really puts all that 20th century fear-mongering into stark perspective. Study after study has come to the same conclusion you see on this chart, that cannabis is dramatically, we're talking hundreds of times, safer than a legal and widely accepted substance like alcohol. It's a scientific reality that just completely challenges the whole foundation of prohibition.
So, we end up right back where we started. On one side, you have a 5,000-year history of this plant as a medicine, a sacrament, and an industrial staple. And on the other side, you have less than 100 years of prohibition that was fueled by fear and corporate greed. The question for all of us, for our future, is pretty simple. Which history are we going to choose to believe?